Now, guess what? These are 7 financial traps that you should never fall into. And by the way, guess what? Those guys who are watching me right now, over 75% of them are already into these traps. And if you can manage to avoid these traps as early as you can, guess what is awaiting of you? Is called the financial freedom. All right, today I'm going to share with you bit by bit, making it simple so that at least you can digest maximum information. And by the way, let me just say thank you for always watching my videos and liking these videos of mine and subscribing as well. If you are one of the people who have not subscribed, I can see you. By the way, do this. Doesn't cost you anything. I'm sharing this information with you for free. The only thing I want from you in favor as a return is to subscribe to this channel. And how do you do that? Just down below there is a small button written subscribe and like this video. So let's get into the business. All right. Now, the very first trap that you should never fall into, and by the way, this is like a major one. It's called buying a house that you cannot afford. Okay, buying a house or building a house, whichever the case. Let's just call it acquiring a house that you cannot afford. Let's say buying a house that you cannot afford. What do I mean like you cannot afford and you're buying it? It's like a contradiction. No, it's not a contradiction. When I say buying a house that you cannot afford, is if you buy a house on the basis of, I don't want to pay rent. Rent is not a good thing. I just want to live it by my own self and all those kind of things. After all, building a house or buying a house is an asset. And you see, that's a narrative that we've been sold all the way since we were young. By the way, I remember back then our parents used to say, hey, guess what? Among all other things that you get after getting out of the education system and you get your job, get yourself a house. Or if not a house, then get yourself a mortgage. Then be paying that mortgage. And I know, by the way, right now you're like, okay, you are one of the guys who say we should not buy a house, all right, Joseph? I didn't know that. Yeah, I know that's what, because these are very, very emotive issues, okay? Now, the point is this. I said that you cannot afford. How can you gauge and know that you cannot afford? You cannot afford if you actually, let's say, for example, you have like 5 million with you right now, okay? The very first time you have accessed 5 million. So you take the 5 million, go buy yourself a piece of land, then you come up with a house, and then you call it a home, and then you are done. You have no money. And then you go back to the struggle that you were doing for you to accumulate that amount of money. And by the way, some guys also go to an extent of borrowing that money to go build a home. And then after that, they go back to the hustle. And then they're taking this loan against what they're getting as a salary. That's a wrong formula. The correct formula to apply is to whenever you get a loan from a bank or whichever the place, and then that loan ought to be generating something to be able to repay back itself. And if you have to add, then you have to add a little bit on top of that. But the point is, can you imagine getting a loan against your salary? No matter how much you make, that is not a correct formula of acquiring a loan. Therefore, I said buying a house that you cannot afford. And I always say, whenever you want to buy something big, an asset or something, if you cannot afford it twice, don't buy it. What do I mean? The house that you want is worth 5 million. Then get yourself 10 million. Build your house because you still have what? A cash flow. And I always tell people, don't consider where you live or your house as an asset. It is not an asset. But if you can take the 5 million, go buy yourself a piece of land. In Kenya, we call it a plot. Once you get a plot, and then you can build rental houses and then build one of yours within that rental houses. Then now you have transformed that specific place, not only a home, but also a cash flow sort of a generating asset. Get what I'm saying? I hope I didn't lose you along the way. Remember one thing, I did not say that people should not build houses. No, I say don't build when you know you cannot afford. And there is another trap that usually people get themselves into. There is this narrative of people acquiring pieces of lands and what have you, and there is this sort of a frantic movement in people acquiring this property. And then maybe you get a loan of $1 million bob. Once you get a loan, you get yourself a piece of land that is somewhere there, guys, where these lands are being sold. That land is not generating you anything. $1 million bob is sleeping somewhere. That $1 million bob could have put it in a treasury bill, so it's giving me, or treasury bond, so it's giving me 17% and all those kind of. Sometimes it's good to make sure that you know exactly what you are doing before you put your money out there. Okay, that's a trap that you should be very careful about. Let's go to the point number 2. The point number 2, it's actually also called acquiring or buying a car that you cannot afford. Buying a car that you cannot afford. I think I should be actually using the term acquiring. Acquiring a car that you cannot what? You can't afford. Okay, you can't afford. So what do I mean by that particular point? The same case scenario. See, when you acquire a car, first of all, let's all agree, unanimously, unless you're using this car to do business. Maybe you're in Uber, you're in transport, you're in logistics. That's what I say. Unless you're in that kind of an engagement, then we cannot consider that car as a liability. Okay, it's an asset with regard to the business that you're doing. But in real sense, if you were to isolate that specific device or a gadget, a car itself, it's a liability. No matter how you use it, the fact remains it's a liability. It's only that it's bringing more money into, then you can consider it as an asset. Now, the point is this: you see, there are people who usually go there and acquire a car that he cannot afford on the basis of, hey, guess what? See, I always love a car, I always acquire a car. You know, we also love cars, all right? We do love cars and all those, and maybe we have them. But the point is this: you acquire them on the principles of, yes, I'm going to acquire this car. What is the underlying issue? Then I want to save on the transport. Why? Because transport costs me a lot of money. And if I can acquire a car, then it will save me this and this and that. If you justify yourself on that basis, then everything will be okay. But if you want to just buy a car because, hey, guess what? Why not? And after all, like, I do love cars and all what have you. And then you get yourself into a situation whereby you don't even afford this car. Then you're buying this car on the hire purchase kind of a form. At that particular point, and by the way, most of the people do acquire these gadgets in the name of, hey, some of my friends have acquired it. I mean, after all, like, I'm the only guy in my family who doesn't have a car, or maybe I just want to be the first person to acquire a car, all those kind of things. You just want to break milestone in a very funny way, okay? So the point is, there is nothing wrong with a car. We do love cars. Cars are amazing, but do so when you know, hey, you ain't gonna choke what you call the cash flow. I've seen some trends that goes on out there. People buying car on the loans basis, and guess what? They are using to acquire these cars. They are using their salaries, the paycheck. They go to the bank and then they realize they have like a salary of 120,000, 150,000, and then they're given the 1.2 million service car or 1.5 million service car, and then they put an upfront of, let's say, 450,000, and then they repay the other money, I don't know, in a period of 18 months or something. So there are those formulas and what have you, and then you get yourself a car, and then 25,000 or 40,000 is usually deducted from your salary. And this car is actually depreciating each and every day. If I can disclose and tell you the number of clients who call me on that basis telling me, hey, Joseph, do you think it's important, or do you think it's worth me selling the car that I have right now because I'm about to clear my loan and then be able to reinvest that back money and all those kind of things? And I wonder, why did you even acquire it in the first place? If you cannot buy it twice, just forget about it. If you have your 1.4 million, I mean 2.4 million somewhere, and then you get a car, or if you can acquire a car of maybe say 1.2, well and good. And by the way, I actually wonder, why wouldn't you invest the money back? Why did you invest the money and then acquire the car using the passive? You see, those are simple strategies that you're supposed to use rather than get yourself into a situation that is actually detrimental to your finance. Okay? Let's get into the third point. The third point is usually a narrative that is usually sold to you called live by your means. Have you ever heard of that narrative? Live by your means. See, when we say live by your means, do you know what exactly means? It means, hey, if you're making 30 G's, okay, if you're making 30 G's or 30,000 per month, then live by a lifestyle which is actually 30,000 per month. I'm telling you, be very careful. Why? Because when somebody tells you live by 30,000 per month, it means that, hey, consume the entire amount of money. And once you consume the entire amount of money, remember one thing: these jobs of yours are never permanent. What you're supposed to understand is that you're supposed to two things. You can actually, one thing that you're supposed to understand is that you ought to be saving something and investing it at the same time where possible or where applicable. And again, you're supposed to understand one thing: you ought to do two things to make sure that you have more money. You either live below your means, you save and invest the surplus, or look for an alternative that can actually supplement that what you're getting. What do I mean? Let's say you earn 30,000 at the end of the month. Now you can look for a side hustle. That's what people call it, but I hate using that term. You can look for a side hustle that can actually make you maybe, let's say, 5,000 or 6,000 or 10,000, okay, at the end of the month. Now you can actually use the 10,000 from the side hustles to invest it and actually live by 30,000 Kenyan shillings. There's no problem. But if you do not have a means, or it's not applicable for you to get a side hustle at this kind of a situation whereby maybe, let's say, you work from 8 to 5 ever, 24/7, but not 24/7, but rather you find yourself only resting one day, then at that particular situation, then you ought to live below your means. Okay, so live below your means. So once you live below your means, see, you live as if you do not. Okay, and then you reinvest the money, and then you make sure that you push the side hustle, okay, or the passive income, sort of a generating asset. you push it up to a point whereby now the amount of money you're making from their passive income is at par with that what you're getting from the main hustle, or we call it the active income. At that kind of a situation, now guess what you have? You have your 30,000 and you have another 30,000. Therefore, it means that you're having more financial power. Therefore, you have more capability of investing more than you had before. Okay, now you keep on investing to a point whereby you elevate. By the way, even before going above that, can you imagine when you're at par at 30,000? Even if you were to quit this job, you can still sustain your life. But that's not the point. I said life is it's actually divided into two. There is sustainability and there is development. And we don't only need to sustain ourselves, but we also want to grow. So you keep on pushing this number to a point whereby it's way above that what you're making. At that particular point, you're moving towards what we call the financial freedom, right? Let's go to the fourth point. Now, the fourth point is quite an interesting one. It's usually by it's this thing of this sort of a narrative that is actually hovering around, and people saying, "Hey, just buy land, just buy this property, just buy, and then that thing we call it non-cash flow, non-cash flow generating asset. I have seen a lot of people getting themselves into this problem. For example, at this particular point, you realize that some people who usually buy a property. I received a call from a guy who told me, "Hey Joseph, I usually receive a salary of 45k per month, and I got a loan from a circle actually, and that circle financed me to get a property worth, I think it was around 1.15 or something of sort, and then these guys are actually deducting 20k out of my salary. Guess what? I'm actually remaining with 25k. Therefore, I need to survive on this 25k." And then I ask him, "Okay, there's no problem. You acquired an asset. But this asset, as we speak, does not generate any income. It's an asset, but does not generate income. It should be, what should I say? It should be income generating assets." And that's why, have you ever heard of people saying, "Hey, loans usually benefit the wealthy and the rich people"? That's very true, because this guy, with his paycheck, he acquired, or he managed to get a loan of 1.15 million. So the guy acquired a piece of land. There is nothing amazing. You see, if you talk about you acquiring a land to any years of a given Kenyan, then you're moving on the right direction. But they do not, dissect into that information and get to realize who is losing at this particular point. And then I'm going to explain a point to you. Now, this guy, based on his paycheck, he actually acquired this kind of a loan, and the guy was to pay, I don't know, this loan in 24 months or something, or rather not 24, 48 something. Now, the point is, being deducted 20,000 out of the salary, so he's remaining with only 25,000. This guy has a kid, has a wife, and he has the bills to pay. He has the rent and what have you. The guy was actually telling me, "I am telling you, I'm actually getting forced to actually borrow out there to fund the consumables." After all, you have to do that because the amount of money that you're being left with, it is not even enough. This dream of acquiring land by all means that is actually being sold to majority of the Kenyans is getting them into lots of unhealthy debts. And I always tell people, if you must acquire land, if you have to get it, then get amount of money that can not only help you acquire land, but at the same time can actually build you some few properties on top of that, so that at least you can have what we call a loan that is generating income. See, this guy is having an asset that is worth 1.15. He doesn't have the capacity to build anything on top of that. He doesn't have the capacity to even do farming. He doesn't even have a capacity to do any value addition from that specific point that can generate at the slightest amount of money. The plot or the piece of land is out there, but guess what? The dream is achieved as it's known in Kenya. So it's good to be very, very careful. If you ask me, if this guy had the capacity to get a loan maybe worth like 2.5 million, the guy can actually build like 2 or 3 units there, and then he can live in one unit. He has salvaged what we call the rent. Therefore, that rent money can be channeled somewhere else, and then the other 2 units are actually bringing him cash. Maybe you can rent that piece of land or that piece of unit maybe at 5,000, 6,000 or 7,000, depends on where you're located. So at that particular point, the thing is actually helping you to survive. If you can generate like 12,000 out of that property plus the 25,000, then it means you are at like 30 something thousand. Therefore, you can be able to do something. At the end of the 4 years, you can be able to go ahead and say, "Hey, I made the right and appropriate decision." I have seen people who have bought land, but they're still struggling and they're in problems out there. Okay, now let's go to the point number 5. We are moving on. There is this another narrative called, hey, guess what? Provide the best. You see, there's something called quality education. First of all, let me just write it. Quality education. There's nothing wrong with quality education. But guess what? People are using that what they are getting. It's costing them arm and length. It's called arm and leg. It's costing them an arm and leg for their kids. You see, you are giving them a quality education, which is amazing. I love it and I support it. But you're doing it above your means. You cannot be able to afford this. And if you're affording this, it's actually choking your cash flow in the name of, hey, guess what? You know, I have to provide the quality education to my kids. I have to do the best for my kids. I cannot bring up my kids the way I was brought up, and all those emotive things and emotional things, to a point whereby you ask this person, okay, fine, there's nothing wrong with you bringing up your kids and what have you. But what are you doing in terms of your retirement, in terms of your pensions, in terms of you investing for the kids and what have you? Okay, the guy is like, no, everything you see with my kids. And this, see, when you invest with your kids with these emotions, where you are actually even choking your cash flow, you cannot even have your, what we call, the retirement plans and what have you. These are the guys who usually turn their kids into an asset. Yeah, they usually take kids at their retirement plan. So the moment they invest like this one, and then the kids maybe turns out to be a, and God forbid, then the guys be like, hey, you know what? I used every dime. I used to. You see, you're supposed to. You see, this situation of them having a quality education and you having a retirement plan is not a question of take this one or the other one. It's not a question of it's either this or that. No, it can actually be both. You can actually offer them what we call, you know, a substantive education, which is actually good based on your means and the capacity, and also pass value deep inside. Okay, what I mean value, I mean is like this. You see, there's nothing wrong if you can give them a substantive or good or presentable education, and at the same time you can actually equip them with values of businesses, values of finance, values of investments, values. So if you give them a sort of that concoction of two things at the same time, that will be the best and amazing things to do out there. I've seen people struggling paying school fees for guys or for the kids that they cannot even afford. And whenever you listen to them, you realize this guy is very emotive, has the emotions about education. So at that particular point, you have to take them from all the way to a point whereby they can understand what you're trying to do. You know why they do this? Because most of them, they usually buy this narrative from their friends. Hey, you know, when they're interacting with your friends and then you realize their kids are doing some funny things there, you're like, what? My kids are not actually getting that. You feel like they're missing out things. Okay, now the sixth one, as we conclude this video, is that bringing forth kids as early as you can. There's a narrative that people actually sell you, especially in Africa. You know, bring forth kids as early as you can. Bring forth kids as early as you can, as early as you can. You see why they say so? Hey, you know what? You're supposed to bring forth kids as early as you can. You know, when you when you bring up kids, you know, when you are young, I don't know, all those narratives and what have you. Those guys who come from Africa, I know exactly, especially Kenya, know exactly what I mean. That one can actually get yourself into a problem. See, when you are young, it's good to have kids, but at the same time, it's also good to focus on developing yourself. Okay, nothing to introduce much about that. And the seventh one, it's about job is the surest thing, is the best thing, is actually the safest thing. No, listen. Job has never been. Job is the safest thing. No, listen, let me tell you one secret. It has never been, will never be. Job, I know most of the people will be like, hey, instead of starting a business, I would rather advise you go out there and start an investment. That's not really the way to go. You should actually go ahead and try to do something as far as the investments are concerned. So if you can actually snatch yourself out of these narratives, then rest assured everything gonna be good to you. Hey, by the way, guess what? You can always pick my number. Is from the description of this specific video. Shoot me a call if you'd like us to have a conversation at a personal level. I offer those services for just a cup of coffee's price. Okay, my number is on the description. And by the way, if you'd like to get a booklet about investments and all those kind of things, I have them, variety of them, for only 280 Kenyan shillings. For now, it's a good buy. And if it's your first time watching me, my name is Joseph, and see you in the next one.